If you drive down Gertrud-Kolmar-Straße in Berlin today, you will see a simple parking lot surrounded by apartment buildings. There is nothing special about the pavement, the painted lines, or the cars sitting there. Yet 40 feet beneath your tires lies the shattered, waterlogged concrete carcass of the most notorious room in human history. This is the story of the Führerbunker, focused not on how it was used, but on what happened to it after the guns stopped firing in 1945. It was blown up, buried, dug up, and buried again. Governments have tried to erase it for 80 years, but the concrete refuses to disappear. On May 2, 1945, the noise of shelling finally stopped. Soviet soldiers cautiously approached the Chancellery Garden and stepped over debris until they found the heavy steel door. It was open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of diesel fumes and almonds, which is the scent of cyanide. They did not find a fortress of resistance, they found a tomb. The looting began almost immediately as soldiers grabbed watches and medals as trophies to strip the place bare. Once the initial frenzy of victory faded, the Soviets realized they had a problem. They controlled the site, but they didn't know what to do with it. A year later, the chaos gave way to cold bureaucracy. In 1946, Soviet intelligence teams returned to document rather than loot. They measured every room, mapped every corridor, and photographed the bloodstains on the sofa that hadn't yet faded. It was a forensic crime scene investigation on a massive scale. They found 16 distinct layers of reinforced concrete above the main rooms, forming a defensive shell so thick that Allied bombs had merely scratched it. This investigation was about confirming that the enemy was truly gone, rather than preserving history. They cataloged the damp furniture and the scattered papers to create a file that would remain classified for decades, while the bunker itself sat silent. The Soviets decided that the bunker had to be destroyed. In December 1947, engineers packed the interior with explosives to collapse the entire structure and erase it from the map. They wired the charges before clearing the area to detonate them. The ground shook as a massive cloud of dust rose over the Chancellery ruins. When the smoke cleared, the engineers saw something frustrating. The explosion had been powerful, but the bunker was stronger. The massive concrete roof had simply lifted a few inches into the air before slamming back down exactly where it had been. The interior walls were cracked, and the ventilation towers were destroyed, but the shell remained largely intact. 12 years passed. The ruins of the Reich Chancellery above ground had been leveled and the marble stripped away to build Soviet war memorials. The bunker underground remained a stubborn problem. In 1959, the East German government controlled the sector and launched a second demolition effort. They lacked the heavy machinery to remove the thickest concrete, so they focused on the entrances and the ventilation shafts that poked out of the ground. They managed to blast these surface features away and covered the entrances with earth. The site was now just a flat, empty field on the surface. Beneath the soil, the water pumps had stopped working, so groundwater began to seep in and slowly flood the rooms. In 1961, the Berlin Wall sliced the city in half, and the site of the bunker ended up in the death strip. It sat in the desolate no-man's land between East and West Berlin, where guards patrolled with orders to shoot on sight. This heavily militarized zone became the bunker's greatest protector because no one could get near it for nearly 30 years. No construction crews could dig it up and no tourists could visit. It simply sat buried and forgotten while the grass grew tall above it. Beneath the mud, the steel safes rusted, and the blue-tiled walls of the kitchen were submerged in rising dark water. The Cold War effectively preserved the site. By the late 1980s, the East German government needed housing. They looked at the empty lands near the wall and decided to build a new residential complex on Gertrud-Kolmar-Straße. They knew something was down there, but they didn't realize the extent of it until the excavators hit concrete. In 1988, the construction crews unearthed the roof of the Führerbunker, which was the upper level of the complex. They had to choose whether to build over it or dig it out. So they chose to destroy it. Huge hydraulic breakers were brought in to chip away at the roof and expose the dark interior to sunlight for the first time in 40 years. The workers found rooms filled with muddy sludge, rotting furniture, and the ruined remnants of the final days. The East German authorities wanted this done quietly. They didn't want a neo-Nazi shrine or Western media attention, so the site was officially off-limits. A photographer named Robert Conrad saw the excavators and knew he had to document it. He disguised himself as a construction worker by wearing dusty overalls and carrying a generic bag. He slipped past the guards for months to climb down into the muddy ruins while the workers were on break. He risked prison time with every visit. Conrad snapped dozens of photos showing rusting steel doors hanging off hinges, watermarks high on the walls, and the ceramic tiles of the bathroom where Hitler's personal physician had once worked. These illegal photos are the only reason we know what the bunker looked like before its final destruction. Conrad found a cramped and disgusting sewer rather than a grand headquarters. The water had to be pumped out to reveal a thick layer of slime that coated everything. He found the remains of the air filtration system, the rusted bodies of diesel generators, and safes that had been torch-cut open by the Soviets 40 years earlier. One photo shows the distinctive white and blue tiles of the scullery still bright against the gloom. The most disturbing discovery involved the murals. The walls in the rooms used by the Goebbels children were still decorated with cheerful drawings, which stood in contrast to the cyanide capsules that had ended their lives in those bunks. The bunker was a rotting container of misery. The construction crews had a schedule to keep and ignored the history. The roof of the upper Führerbunker was relatively easy to remove, but the deeper Führerbunker where Hitler died was much more difficult. The concrete was too thick to fully excavate without delaying the apartment project for years. The engineers compromised by using heavy machinery to smash the roof of the lower bunker and collapse it into the rooms below. They then filled the entire cavity with gravel, sand, and debris. They crushed and buried the bunker rather than removing it. The floor, walls, and foundations were left in place under tons of earth to seal the site forever. One man watched the news with particular interest while the bunker was being crushed. Rokas Misch was Hitler's bodyguard and telephone operator who ran the switchboard until the final days. He was the last survivor of the bunker. He returned to Berlin after 9 years in Soviet captivity and lived a quiet life just a few miles from the site. He remained the only person for decades who could point to a patch of grass and identify it as the place where he slept. He lived until 2013 and died at the age of 96. He received letters from historians and conspiracy theorists until his last days, but he always told them that it was just a job. And the bunker was just a concrete box. The new German government faced an old dilemma after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and the city was reunified. The apartments were finished, and a parking lot was paved over the bunker site. Tourists started coming to ask where it was, but the government refused to put up a sign for 15 years. They feared that marking the spot would turn it into a pilgrimage site for neo-Nazis. Tour guides had to gesture vaguely at the parking lot while visitors wandered around, looking for a museum that didn't exist. The policy was active erasure, because they wanted the world to forget the exact coordinates of the former headquarters. The silence ended in 2006 when Germany hosted the FIFA World Cup and thousands of international visitors arrived in Berlin. The Berlin Underworlds Association argued that hiding the past was impossible. They believed conspiracy theorists would mark the site with lies if the government didn't do it officially. They were allowed to install a single, modest information board after a long dispute. It stands on the sidewalk today and shows a schematic of the bunker, along with a few photos. Rokas Misch attended the unveiling at 88 years old. He touched the board and nodded as he finally saw the place officially recognized. The existence of the bunker's ruins provides strong evidence against the escape theories that still circulate on the internet. The layout matched the Soviet maps from 1946 perfectly when the Führerbunker was excavated in 1988. The bodies found by the Soviets, along with the matching dental records, were located exactly where witnesses said they would be. The physical reality of the bunker is a claustrophobic concrete tube buried in mud, which tells the story of a trap rather than an escape route. There were no secret tunnels leading to an airfield. There were only damp corridors leading to a garden, surrounded by the Red Army. The parking lot covers a grave rather than an escape point. Visitors in 2025 will likely be underwhelmed by the site. The address is Gertrud-Kolmar-Straße, which is named after a Jewish poet who died in Auschwitz. The city renamed the street as a deliberate, symbolic act. You will see a small playground, a row of unremarkable apartments, and the famous parking lot. You cannot enter the bunker. The Berlin Underworlds group runs tours of other bunkers nearby, like the one at Gesundbrunnen. But the Führerbunker remains sealed. There is no entrance, no museum, and no ticket booth. This historically significant location is now a place where residents park their cars and walk their dogs. This ordinariness stands in sharp contrast to the man who built it. Hitler envisioned a world capital called Germania, with a hall so massive it would have its own weather system. He wanted to be worshipped for 1,000 years, but his final resting place is a parking spot. There is no grand monument to tear down because there is nothing there. Berlin achieved what explosives couldn't, by burying the bunker and building a functional city on top of it. They turned a site of horror into nothingness. The history is remembered, but the shrine is gone. The Führerbunker shows 80 years later that stone and concrete can be broken, but history is harder to erase. The physical structure lies crushed in the dark, while the world above moves on. It sits exactly where it belongs, beneath the feet of a free and democratic city. If you enjoyed this look into hidden history, please like and subscribe for more stories from the past.